They laughed at her, mocked her every day, pushed her down, called her names, and thought she was weak. But then, something changed. At first, it was subtle, a look in her eyes, a shift in the air. And then, one by one, they stopped laughing. No one could explain it. The bullies who once tormented her now avoided her gaze, their laughter turning into whispers of fear. Some refused to speak about what happened. Others vanished without a trace. But the real question is, what changed? Was it revenge? A dark force answering her silent cries? Or had she become something else entirely? Whatever it was, they should have left her alone. The wind carried the scent of rain through the high walls of Abet Abun Secondary School, a strict boarding school nestled in the Ethiopian highlands. Rows of students dressed in neatly pressed uniforms moved through the courtyard, their voices a mix of chatter and laughter. But among them, Selam walked alone. She was a ghost among the living, her presence barely acknowledged except when it was time to mock her. Selam had always been different. She spoke only when necessary, kept her head down, and spent most of her time scribbling in her notebook. Her classmates found her odd, and in a place where conformity was survival, being different was dangerous. The worst of them all was Hannah, the leader of a small clique of girls who found pleasure in tormenting her. "Look at the mute girl," Hannah would sneer, nudging Selam's books off her desk. "Maybe if you speak, we won't think you're cursed." The other girls would laugh, and Selam, as always, would say nothing. One afternoon, as the sky darkened with an approaching storm, Hannah saw Selam slip something into her school bag, a small, folded parchment covered in strange symbols. Curiosity burned inside her. What was the quiet girl hiding? That night, as the dormitory settled into hushed whispers and the sound of rustling blankets, Hannah made her move. She crept toward Selam's bedside, carefully pulling the parchment from her bag. She stepped into the dim glow of the hallway light, her heart pounding with excitement. Without thinking, she whispered the words written on the page. The moment the last syllable left her lips, the air grew heavy. A gust of wind rushed through the dormitory, though the windows were shut. The hallway light flickered, and in the silence that followed, a single whisper echoed through the air, "Hannah." Hannah's breath itched as the whisper brushed against her ear, soft yet chilling, like a voice carried by the wind. She spun around, eyes darting toward the darkened hallway. The dormitory was silent, save for the rhythmic breathing of sleeping students. Her hands trembled as she glanced back at the parchment. The symbols glowed faintly for a moment, then the ink seemed to dissolve into the paper, leaving it blank. A sudden, forceful gust slammed into the hallway, making the dormitory doors rattle. Hannah let out a stifled gasp, her pulse hammering in her throat. She shoved the parchment back into Selam's bag and hurried back to her bed, pulling the covers over herself. Sleep did not come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt a presence watching her. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the walls, and in the darkness, something breathed. At exactly 3 o'clock a.m. Hannah awoke with a start. A pressure weighed on her chest, heavy like unseen hands pinning her down. Her eyes flickered open, and there, looming above her, was a figure cloaked in darkness. Its face was a void, except for its mouth, which slowly curled into a sinister smile. It leaned close, its breath cold against her ear, and whispered again, "Hannah. You called me." Hannah's scream caught in her throat, suffocated by the crushing weight on her chest. She thrashed, desperate to break free, but the unseen force held her down. The shadow loomed closer, its grin widening. Its voice was neither loud nor soft, yet it echoed inside her skull like a distant drumbeat. "You read the words. You called me." The lights in the dormitory flickered violently, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the weight lifted. Hannah gasped for air, bolting upright. Sweat clung to her skin despite the cold. The dormitory was still. No one else stirred. The shadows had returned to their proper places. Trembling, she pulled her knees to her chest, staring at the dark corners of the room. Had she imagined it? Was she losing her mind? But then, from the other side of the dome, she heard it again, her name, whispered from the shadows. Morning came too slowly, dragging itself over the horizon like an injured beast. Hannah barely managed to get dressed for class. Her face was pale, and dark circles had formed under her eyes. Her friends laughed and teased her for looking like she had seen a ghost. She stole a glance at Selom, who sat quietly at the back of the classroom, as usual. The girl hadn't reacted last night. Has she noticed anything? Did she know what Hannah had done? Guilt and anger swirled in Hannah's gut. She had meant to humiliate Selom, to expose her secret, not bring this thing into her life. As the teacher droned on, Hannah absently rolled up her sleeve and froze. A black symbol, identical to those on the parchment, had appeared on her wrist overnight. It was faint, like a shadow beneath her skin, but it paused as if alive. A sickening realization settled in her gut she hadn't imagined last night. Something had changed. The voices followed Hannah throughout the day, creeping through the edges of her hearing, just beneath the surface of normal sound. Whenever she was alone, they grew stronger. Hannah, you called me. By evening, she was on edge. She couldn't focus, couldn't eat. Every time she glanced at her reflection, she swore something was wrong with her eyes. Just for a split second, they didn't look like hers. She needed answers. And only one person could give them. That night, long after lights out, she approached Selom's bed, shaking her awake. Selom, she whispered urgently. What was on that parchment? Selom blinked at her, groggy, then frowned. You read it. Hannah hesitated. Then, tap, tap, tap. A slow, deliberate knock sounded on the dormitory door. The whispers eased through the room. And Selom's eyes widened in terror. Selom shot up from her bed, her breathing shallow. You weren't supposed to read it. The knock came again, louder this time. The other girls in the dorm remained motionless, deep in sleep, as if under some unnatural spell. Hannah gripped Selom's wrist, panic setting in. What's happening to me? She whispered. Selom swallowed hard. It's too late, she murmured. You called something ancient. And now it won't leave. The knocking stopped, but the room felt colder. The air grew dense, and then, a single voice, hoarse and amused, whispered directly into Hannah's ear. Let me in. The next day, Hannah was different. Her friends noticed it immediately. She jumped at every sudden movement, flinched at unseen figures. At lunch, she barely touched her food, eyes darting around the cafeteria as though something lurked just beyond sight. Selom avoided her completely. Hannah had never paid much attention to her before, but now she realized Selom wasn't afraid of her. She was afraid for her. That night, as she lay in bed, the whispers returned, this time not just calling her name. They laughed a soft, dry chuckle that seemed to crawl from the corners of the room. The shadows moved unnaturally. And then, in the dim glow of the moonlight, Hannah saw it, a hand, long and skeletal, slipping from beneath her bed. The moment Hannah saw the hand, she bolted upright, scrambling to the far edge of her bed. The hand retreated into the darkness, but she knew it was still there. Watching. Waiting. Her breathing was ragged. She squeezed her eyes shut, gripping her sheets. It's not real, she muttered under her breath. It's not real. Then, a whisper in her ear, then why are you afraid? Days passed, and Hannah's torment worsened. The thing no longer hid. She saw glimpses of it in reflective surfaces, black, sunken eyes and a twisted, grinning mouth. At night, it grew bolder. It whispered in languages she didn't understand, traced cold fingers along her skin. She was losing herself. She tried ignoring it, tried praying, but nothing worked. She needed Selam. She needed answers. And when she finally cornered Selam in an empty classroom, she wasn't prepared for what she heard. The parchment wasn't a spell, Selam whispered. It was a warning. Selam told Hannah the truth. The words she had read had bound the entity to her. It wasn't just haunting her. It was feeding in her fear. Hannah was breaking. The lack of sleep, the constant torment, her mind felt frayed. And worse, the shadow wasn't satisfied anymore. It wanted more. Selam hesitated before saying the final, chilling words, "If you don't stop it now, soon, it won't just whisper. It will take you." Selam took Hannah to a quiet part of the schoolyard after classes, where an old woman, Wezero Janet, waited. She was the school's cook, but some whispered that she knew ancient things forgotten by most. Wezero Janet listened to Hannah's story, nodding slowly. "The spirit you called is a Qutet, an ancient whispering demon. It feeds on fear, and once it latches onto you, it will never stop." Hannah shivered. "How do I get rid of it?" The elder's face darkened. "It will not go willingly. You must face it, deny it power. Do not run. Do not scream. If you do, it will consume you." That night, the three of them gathered in an abandoned storage room. Candles flickered around them as Wezero Janet drew symbols on Hannah's forehead with ash. "The Qutet lives in the shadows. We will force it to show itself," the elder said. "But you must stand firm, Hannah. If you fear it, it will stay forever." The lights flickered. A deep, guttural laugh echoed in the room. Then, from the corner, the shadows began to shift. The quartet emerged, its tall, twisted form barely human. It grinned, its black eyes narrowing. "Hannah," it purred, voice like rustling leaves. "You cannot fight me." Hannah's body trembled, but she took a deep breath. "You have no power over me." The demon snarled. It lunged, trying to wrap around her, but this time, Hannah did not scream. She stood tall. The more she ignored it, the weaker it became. Its whispers turned to wails, its form flickering like smoke. Wezero Janet began chanting. The candle's flames roared to life, casting away the darkness. Hannah clenched her fist. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said. The quartet screamed, its form twisting. It lashed out one last time, but it was too late. It was losing its hold. With a final, furious shriek, it vanished into nothingness. The room fell silent. The candles burned steadily. Hannah collapsed, breathless, but free. The next morning, Hannah woke feeling lighter. The whispers were gone. The black mark on her wrist had faded. For the first time in weeks, she felt normal. She found Selam in the courtyard. There was no need for words. She simply sat beside her, and Selam smiled, a small, knowing smile. From that day on, Hannah never mocked Selam again. And as for the parchment, Selam burned it, watching as the embers carried its dark secrets away. Some things were never meant to be read.